to Allegiant Webwise podcast, streaming live for the very first time. And in honor of that, we'd like to do a big shout out to our watcher and listener of the week, our superstar, who this week is Aaron Van Toft. We've learned from that Aaron doesn't watch any other streams, he doesn't watch any podcasts. So we'd like to say a great big thank you to Aaron.
Woo!
Cheers, Aaron. So, I can see Mike in the background there. Is everything working, Mike? Shall I continue?
You carry on.
Okay, I'm going to carry on. That's it. It's absolutely seamless. Do you know what, guys?
Hey,
we were thinking...
This happens on live TV, I'll have you know.
What, people interrupting you? Wait, no, not a lot. Very professional. Listen, guys, listeners, watchers, we were thinking about what should we actually talk about this week. And we ditched our plan because we're going to go for this case study. The reason we're going for the case study is because you asked for it. In fact, you actually demanded it, which was fantastic. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, we've already been starting with Martin. You're going to see the audience figures spike with Mike. But the best bit of all is we're going to thrill with Jill. Hi, Jill.
No pressure there, eh? No pressure to bring the thrills of the case study of outsourcing. Woo woo. Okay, so we're going to talk about, there's various things we could talk about, but one of the ones we're going to talk about is something that we did recently, and that was we were trying to get somebody on board to help with our effectively, it was going to be helping with our maintenance. So we had some specifics around that. So the first thing that we looked at was actually, what is it we want them to do? Because that's really important. It's if you don't know what you want somebody to do, then there's no point in taking them on. And then from that, we then produced a job description, which was quite clear, quite detailed, I think. And we had a little bit of around the houses with that, didn't we, lads?
Mike?
Oh, we did. Yes, we certainly did. It was a really interesting and I think that when you get into this situation of setting out your agenda, setting out what you need, the first and most important thing for us was being exceedingly specific about what we wanted the person to do. Very much so in the WordPress community, you get people with variations of skills, varieties of skills, not variations, but varieties of skills. And so we didn't really want somebody that had been going 20 years, if you like, at WordPress. We wanted somebody that had really niched down, if you like, into the whole maintenance side and looking after websites, as opposed to somebody that was this real amazing front end, back end developer and having this enormous amount of skills. So what tends to happen when you start to add these pieces of information that you need into things like Upwork, for example, is that despite putting down the countries that you would like people to be interested from, opening it up, you end up with all kinds of people coming in, and despite putting in certain amounts of criteria, that equally those people with different sets of criteria arrive on the scene. And so what we then had to do is we then had to look at each one of those individuals and begin to speak with them to see whether they would be a good fit for us.
I think that's a good point. Is we had a lot of conversation about what do you set the criteria as, and I know from my experience of having done quite a lot of recruiting in a previous life, it really doesn't matter what you put down as a criteria if you're going to judge that on a CV, because people will write what you say that you want. And especially with AI now, writing a load of CVs, it doesn't prove anything at all. So we came to the conclusion that basically testing people out, giving them a task to do would be the easiest way to see, well, can they do what we need or not? And so that was the next stage, wasn't it, Jill?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Just coming back to that criteria point of view, Mike and I spent some time writing a jobs description, and then we sent it to Martin, who then went, "Oh no, that looks like a super technical thing." And then he wrote something that was all flowers and butterflies, and then we sort of landed somewhere in the middle. So I think it's really important that you get somebody else to sense check what you've written, because it's really easy to get right into the guts of it, and before you know it, your technical spec looks like something that you didn't really intend it to look like. So it's always good to have a sense check. So that was good. And then we had a good number of people who did apply, as the lads have said. And we had to then work out how were we going to whittle this down to some people. So the first thing we did was we gave them a small task in order to weed out the ones that didn't do what we said. Because doing what we say is really, really important. And, everybody has their own opinion. They might be doing it for a while. They might say, well, I do it this way, I do it that way. But we really needed somebody to do it our way. So we gave them a task, which was to fill in a form. I think it was just a Google form, wasn't it? And then from that, we asked them some questions in that Google form. And like Martin said, in some ways, it wasn't particularly important what was in those forms. It was that task was about, will you do what we say? And then from that did weed them out quite a bit, didn't it? And so then we took the ones that did do it and did it reasonably into the next stage. And the next stage, I'm trying to remember. Did we do another stage before we did the test?
Just let me go back over those.
Yeah,
Just
go on.
focus on those questions that we asked again. And it's amazing how many people just don't read.
Yeah.
And so, and I think this was Jill's point when we originally discussed the whole thing, and certainly from an experience that you'd had before, Jill. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jill had been through this experience before, and it was a very important thing to just be able to ascertain whether somebody could read a brief. Because if they're not going to read the brief, if they're not going to read the questions, then it's highly likely that when you then ask them to do something and it has any kind of level of detail in it, there's a big chance that they won't read it either. So one of the things that we then did was, after we had weeded out the people that hadn't specifically answered the questions, we then looked very, very specifically at each and every one of their profiles. And from there, it was a case of looking at almost whittling it down to, say, 2 or 3 from the X amount that we had, to be able to say, okay, what's the final stage of this? Who would we like to give an opportunity to do some actual maintenance work for us, and see how they perform, and see whether they going to need us, whether just what the difficulties were going to be.
Yeah, and I think I'd reiterate what we said about giving people a task, because when you looked at the profiles that came through, so the people who said, yes, we're interested in working with you, here's our profile on, Upwork or wherever it was. Just looking at those, we had an idea in our mind who we thought would be most suitable. As it turns out, when they came to do the tasks, it wasn't who we thought was the most suitable that actually was the most suitable. So it really does underpin, find a way that you can actually get someone to do something, and then you've got a much better idea of whether they're the sort of person that you can work with, and whether they can work with you as well. We learned lessons ourselves in how to actually specify what we wanted, because to us it was very clear, but we're doing it every day. So it's really interesting to see what people did that wasn't quite what we wanted, and reflect back, well, do we need to work on how we ask as well?
Yeah, so the task that we gave was to do maintenance on a site, and we had given a very detailed checklist. So it was very concise. People could go through, they could check off what they'd done, know where they were in that process, and we knew roughly how long that task would take. We paid them for this. So they weren't, we're not messing people around and saying, oh, keep getting work for free. We paid them for it. And we gave them the task, and we gave them the logins they needed to do the task. We gave them the sheet that they needed to work through it. And then it was very interesting to see what they did with that task and how they approached it, and whether they actually did what you expected or whether they did something completely different. And well, do you want to say something about that, Mike? You were a bit closer to that than I was.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience, because at this point you're into chat, just chatting with somebody, so we did a pre-subscribed, try saying that on a few whiskeys, standard operating procedure. And I asked the individual that we hired to go through this on a number of websites. And I also had a level of expectation of how long this would take. And so as soon as I mentioned how long I thought it would take, I had an immediate response, which was almost an incredulity of you expect me to be able to do it in that amount of time? Well, yeah, because that's how long it usually takes me. So I think one of the things I said in one of our previous episodes was that sometimes you have to you have to almost see how they're going to respond to you giving them something that they may think is outside of their comfort zone, because very often people work in a comfort zone, and actually by seeing how they respond to that is another thing. So what the individual could have done was said, okay, well, I usually take a little bit longer to do it than that, but what I will do is I will attempt to do it, and I will get back to you and let you know how I've got on, which is quite a reasonable response. But the response that I got was much more not combative, but it was you expect me to do it in that amount of time. Yeah, actually I do, because that's how long it would have taken me. And then, without going into detail of every single question that then came up, it was like a repeat question, then another question, then another question. And it wasn't things that I would have expected somebody with that amount of skill to be able to that should be asking. So I think we'd been very prescriptive about what we were looking for. And so I would have just expected, okay, I've done this, I've checked this, and we can go from there. So I think that the experience of having somebody on board, again, going back to the last episode, I said, you've got to think about your time to manage that individual. I could have, in my mind, I could have actually done those tasks in the time it took me to go back and forth and back and forth and think about the response that I had to give to this individual. Now, I did say go for the long run as well. So obviously, if we'd have done another one or another one or another one, that person would have then understood what we were looking for, and then potentially they would have been far, far better for us. So maybe they were just checking understanding, which is, of course, perfectly fine. But it was just for me personally, I immediately fed back to my Allegiant Webwise colleagues saying that this has actually been quite a difficult situation, bearing in mind that how busy I was and having to go back and forth with this individual. Jill, I know that you've had situations where you with any of your outsourcing team where there's been times where you just want them to get the work done, and for what reason, whether it be a lack of understanding, or maybe I might have this wrong, but maybe the motivation to get it done, bearing in mind that you've given them timelines and deadlines. Have you kind of had the similar sort of scenario to the one that I described to you when we were trying to get this WordPress maintenance work done?
Yes, I have. But however, the type of communication, I think there's something about the type of communication, the way the person was responding to you, the language that was being used, it was. I've never experienced that kind of pushback and real. Yeah, it was an attitude really, and I haven't experienced that type of. Well, no, that's not true. I actually did, but then yeah. Now that I think about it, there was one occasion when I did experience this with a team that I used, and they just didn't want to do what I wanted them to do. They wanted to do it their way, and actually, the more that I pushed in, no, I want it my way, the more they were like grumpy about it. But in general, and particularly in an interview situation, you would think, or a test situation, you would think people would be more amenable to give it a go and just say, okay, I'll give it a go. And see where you go from there. I think that now in this occasion, now there is that point where you do need to think about training and actually what do you want to do, and you need to have that time in your diary when you're going through this to make sure that you have the time to be courteous, be kind to the person, to make sure that you're giving every person the same best chance that you can. But at the end of the day, they have to be courteous and kind back, don't they? Otherwise, you don't want to work with them, do you? And
yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because you end up in this scenario where the supposed time that you were supposed to be saving has been taken up, not only with you've lost that time, that's that time you thought you were going to reclaim, but you didn't get it, and you've got stressed about it as well, because you've gone into management state.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've had some positives, we have some negatives. If we were to try to sum up some kind of key lessons from having been through that, if you just wanted to pick one or 2 points, Jill, what would they be? That our listeners could get some value from.
Well, I think I don't want to leave a cliffhanger here. I want people to know the outcome of that process. And the outcome of the process was we didn't actually hire from that process. And so that was interesting in itself. So then it was back to the drawing board, and what do we actually do about that? And we have some other ideas about what we're doing that, and maybe we'll share them as we go forward in future episodes. Don't want to let the cat out of the bag, so to speak.
No, the cat's always out of the bag with Allegiant Webwise.
Yeah, so that's all I want to say.
Okay, fair enough. Couple of points for yourself, Mike.
Yeah, I think going back to the original time that we started this, I think point number one, make sure you ask some pointed questions that you expect to get full answers for. And that becomes your first stage of deciding whether or not to take people through to the next round. And then when you're into stage two, really analyzing the skill sets of the people individually, and also communicating with them at that point as well, if it's possible, using whichever platform that you're doing, where you can ask some questions of them and see what their communication skills and style is like, and also see their command of the language as well, because going forward, this is where English, obviously being spoken as a world language, isn't always spoken very well by everybody. So sometimes things can get lost in translation. So it's very, very important to do that. So I would definitely pick on those 2 points.
Okay, brilliant. And I think for me, being not quite as close as the two of you to this particular exercise, it's kind of clear from this conversation that things that you need to think about are, it's very easy to go, this is technically what we want. We live in a tech world, so these are our technical specifications. But we're talking about working with someone on an ongoing basis And actually those personality things are just as important. Obviously, you want people who've got the basic competence, but there are a lot of them out there. It's not like we were asking for something extremely difficult to do. What makes the difference is those soft skills, as they call them. So we need to, in our specification, find a way to actually measure those, as well as, technically, can they do A, B, and C? As Jill said, this isn't the end of the story, because we are still looking to achieve what we set out to do. We're taking a slightly different track. So come back and find out how that works out. Guys, thank you very much for sticking with us through our first live. Thank you very much for the questions that we had. We'd love to have some more. We're going to be back. So for now, listen to that nice cut out the bag outro music, and we will see you all in the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers,
Bye.
everybody.